techniques would you suggest, for example, responding to a kid that is frustrated because they've gotten the wrong answer a couple of times and they're like, what are you fishing for?
Mm.
Then what?
We get the fishing question a lot, don't we? Because we actually have done a little preparation for the class, and we're talking about the climactic moment, for example, talking ourselves around the story chart, and we want to know how the climactic moment hooks up with the conflict of the story. And it's possible to have an answer to that question, what moment is the climax, that doesn't make any sense. If a student hasn't done the reading or is not following the discussion, he can say something wrong.
Well,
Right.
even if he has, sometimes they misperceive the thematic content, even when they've gotten the story chart exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you redirect a student when they're really not hitting the big game you hope that they will?
Good question. What do you guys think, Pelicans? What principle should you rely on to help yourself navigate around a wrong answer? And make it a Socratic principle. What Socratic principle? If the Socratic method is a full orbed method, what is there about the Socratic method that would lead to a solution to that problem?
Okay, so you've come to class, Amber,
Go
with
ahead, yeah.
With a handful of questions in your pocket, and you've asked them all, and they still don't get it. Now what? How are you going to redirect them when they just aren't getting it? What are you going to redirect them to?
Yeah, that's a great way to put that question, because here in teaching literature, we have something that is a saving grace at our elbow all the time in teaching, which is everybody's got a copy of the text.
Yeah, that's right? Exactly it. You're
Everybody's got a copy of the book in their hand.
Yeah, turn to page whatever, right? Let's take a look at this passage together. And so you read the passage aloud.
Or have them read it.
Whatever your goals are there. And then you ask another question, or you ask the same question you asked before again, and say, what does this passage have to say? Or how does this passage speak to that question I just asked?
Here's a way to say you're thinking down the wrong track without abandoning your philosophical stance of Socratic ignorance. You can ask this question: what does the third paragraph on page 14 suggest about the answer to this question? You're going to say to the students, look, I am going to make you apply the third paragraph on page 14 to this question.
Yeah.
Take it from me. There's some meat in here that's worth chewing on.
And Stacy, you're exactly right. Sometimes they'll have gone down a different road than you intended, but it's a good road. And when that's the case, you can ask them to support what they're saying with the text. Okay, so where do you see that? We want to follow you for a minute. Where do you see that? Let's flesh that out a little bit. You can see where they're going, and if it's actually there in the story, if they didn't import it in wrongly, then you can say, great idea. I really like that. What about this over here? And then you can redirect them, or you can continue down that path if it's a good one and take it all the way to the end. A willingness to flex a little in class time is always a good idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, and keeping in mind, if there's a rabbit trail that comes up and kids are jumping in and saying, I find this on this page and this on this page, and maybe that's not the theme you wanted to talk about, something is happening that's worth all of your time, which is that it's being modeled. The Socratic inquiry, the proper treatment of the literary art is being modeled and followed. Absolutely. Even if it's a rabbit trail based on your lesson plan.
And if in fact it is a rabbit trail that you don't want to go down, or that you think is an error, you can say, that's really interesting. That's really interesting.
I want to come back to that later.
I want to put a pin in that and come back later. I just want to put a pin in that.
Yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Which doesn't say you're wrong to the student and shut them down and discourage them from the kind of question asking you're hoping that they'll adopt. But instead, it just literally redirects their attention, right?
My kids in college, they're all English majors, and they all went to the same college, and they have a range of English teachers, and they laugh sometimes because one of their teachers is always saying, let's put a pin in that and come back around to that.
That's really interesting.
And another one of their teachers, when faced with the same sort of question, goes like this. He goes, no, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard.
But you know what? I would imagine that the one that says that's the dumbest thing he ever heard doesn't get as much participation in his classroom.
No, also, I think they understand he's just joking. But Missy, you're exactly right. A great technique to redirect a conversation back to what you want to talk about is, that's very interesting. Let's move on to let's take a different tack. But in either case, the technique that needs to be reinforced over and over again is, in quotes, I don't know. Let's look at the text. Or let's look at this text and you tell me.
Or, look, I'm not pushing an agenda here.
Right.
What is the author talking about here?
Right. And that's kind of what I mean by I don't know in that situation. I'm not pushing an agenda. What we're trying to do is figure out Chaucer or figure out Mark Twain.
Right.
So let's go to page 11 and see what it tells us.
Mm-hmm.